Welcome everyone to today's episode of Did You Know? This week we are going to talk about the much anticipated how to tab your coding manuals. We've gotten lots and lots of questions about, okay, you at CCO have talked me through the BHAT technique, right? Bubble, highlight, annotate technique. You've talked me through where to put notes and how to find information and where to pull the errata, but I really want to know, what do you recommend I do for tabbing my manuals? Where do I put the tabs? What kind of tabs do I use? What should I tab? What shouldn't I tab? All of those different pieces. So that's what I'm going to talk through. I'm going to give you lots of different options, show you that it's really up to you and doing what works for you. So let's go ahead and dive in and get started. The things that we're going to go through is I'm going to talk to you about what to tab, right? For each manual, CPT, ICD-10-CM, HCPCS, the three most commonly used. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the ICD-10-PCS manual for those of you who are working on the inpatient facility side. We'll talk about where to tab the manuals. Do I tab it on the side? Do I tab it on the top? Do I tab it on the bottom? We'll kind of talk about pros and cons for each. And what kind of tabs to use, because there's lots of different options out there. I'll share with you some of my personal experiences and really leave it up to you, because it really comes down to your personal preference, what you like, what you don't like, what works for you, and what doesn't. So let's start out with, okay, if I'm going to tab CPT, right, I'm going to tab my new CPT manual, where should I put my tabs? What areas should I tab? Well, I put a list of the main areas that I recommend you tab in a CPT manual. Really, it's the main sections of CPT, right? So I put a tab where the evaluation and management section is. Put a tab where anesthesia is. The purpose of a tab is simply to identify where an area starts, where a code range begins, whatever it may be, but it's just a point of reference. It can't provide any additional information. It can simply label what's there, right? It's a label. So I know if I'm taking the exam and they're asking me a question about anesthesia, I can turn very quickly to that section of the manual. Whole purpose of the tabs is to help you flip more efficiently, right? Work more quickly. So I would do all of those main sections, E&M, anesthesia, each section of the surgery section, right? Integumentary, musculoskeletal, respiratory, cardiovascular, digestive, urinary, male and female genitalia, the nervous system, the eye and ocular adnexa, the auditory section, and then you get to those other areas of the manual, right? Radiology, pathology and laboratory, and medicine. If you're looking at your code books, it's usually pretty easy to identify where those different sections start. For example, let me lift up I just got my new 2017 manual, right? And if we look at the side of the professional edition, you'll see that your pages changed color, right? This red section up front is my E&M, or evaluation and management. Blue section behind it is the anesthesia section. This big green section here encompasses everything from integumentary all the way back to auditory. Used to, several years ago, you'll see there's little white marks on the edge of the manual. Those used to actually be indented little thumb spots so that you could flip there more quickly without having to tab your manual. AMA did away with that several years ago because the cost to print the book that way was more expensive. So they went to identifying it with a white spot. That's actually a really good place to kind of line your tab up if you're one of those that likes to tab on the side of the book. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, but you want to do all of those main sections. Then I actually recommend that you tab a couple of the appendices, particularly the three that I find people use most frequently. Modifiers, the electrodiagnostic medicine listing of sensory, motor, and mixed nerves, right? That EMG table, a lot of people refer to it that way. It's Appendix J. Appendix L for the vascular families when you're doing your cardiac caths and your different vascular procedures. Those are the three I find are most utilized during the exams. Outside of the exams, are there other appendices that I use frequently? Absolutely, especially Appendix C, which are my clinical examples. So I may choose to tab that one as well. this is just kind of a baseline of things that you're probably going to use and want to make sure you've got something there for. Some of the other areas that you may want to identify: place of service codes, right? They're up there in the very front of the manual. The introduction, because remember, when you're taking the certification exams, they tend to ask you a lot of information about the history of the code set or proper use of the code set. And oftentimes some of that information is right up there in the introduction to the manual. So you'll want to make sure you've already read that, you've highlighted those sections, and if you put a tab there, it's easy to find it. It's easy to say, oh, here's the intro. You'll want to do the same thing with the anatomical and procedural review, right? So that you can look for those anatomical illustrations more quickly. The evaluation and management tables. Those are right in front of the E&M section. Many people find those helpful in identifying which code set they're working in and getting a quick list of the requirements for that code set. The surgery guidelines, they're at the beginning of the surgery section, so they're right before the integumentary section, right after the anesthesia section in your book. Those apply to the entire surgery section, from integumentary all the way through auditory. So you're going to want to know where that information is. And then also, I would recommend that you tab the index. Some people choose to tab each letter of the index individually. Personally, that doesn't work well for me because I kind of trip over my tabs and I find it easier just to flip through and find what I'm looking for. But if that works for you, it works for you. Whatever works best for you is what this is all about. So those are just a few of the places I would recommend for tabbing the CPT manual. Right? For tabbing the ICD manual, what do I tab? Well, I'm going to recommend that you do the same things, right? Tab all of the main sections of the manual. So chapter 1 through chapter 21. And I would recommend tabbing where the T codes start, because chapter 19, if you remember, chapter 19 are your injuries, poisonings, those types of codes. That section is very large and it runs through S00 through T88. So what I would recommend is actually putting a tab at the beginning of chapter 19 where the S codes start, and I would put a second tab at where the T codes start, just because I find that makes it a little easier for me when I'm working through the manual. Trying to flip through that whole big section, it helps to have a little divider partway through. Other areas at a bare minimum, besides the individual chapters in the tabular section of ICD-10, where else would I recommend that you put tabs? Well, there's lots of places. I would tab the conventions, right up the very front where it tells you how to use the book and what the different things mean, right? What NEC means, what NOS means, what brackets mean, what parentheses mean, what and or, and all those different things are up there in the conventions. Then I would tab the guidelines, and you may want to put multiple tabs in your guidelines. For me, I just use the one. I do know some people tab each chapter of the chapter specific guidelines. Again, it comes down to what works for you. It also comes down to which book are you using, which publisher, because some of the publishers reprint the chapter specific guidelines in front of that specific chapter in the tabular section of ICD-10. If that's the case, you don't really need to tab the guidelines up front individually, right? You can tab them with the chapters. Anatomical illustrations, if your manual has a section in it for just anatomical illustrations. The alphabetic index. This is another one where it's all up to you. I put one tab at the beginning of the alphabetic index, and I tend to put additional tabs at some of the areas I use frequently, like family history and some of those codes that I tend to go to a lot, or I know. I don't want, for me personally, doing A, B, C, D, all of that slows me down, because I focus too much on where I'm at, and trying to flip through the pages, those tabs get in the way for me. But if I've got one tab at the very beginning, one tab at history, and then maybe another tab a little further back at, I don't know, sometimes I tend to tab the status post, right? Or the long-term medications codes, those that I don't think about the fact that they're worded a little differently, so that I've got just a few markers as I go through there rather than 26, right? A through Z. Tab the neoplasms table. tab the table of drugs and chemicals, tab the external cause index. And when you're going, well, where do I put all these? Don't worry, I've got pictures on the next couple slides. I just want to start out with getting you thinking about what you want to tab. You want to tab these main sections, but in addition to these, wherever you put notes in your manual, maybe there's somewhere in your manual, for example, in my manual for HIV and AIDS, right, I put a list of the conditions that say a patient has AIDS, right? If a patient has this condition and they're HIV positive, the federal government tells me by definition they have AIDS. Well, I put that little list in my manual. Well, what I would want to do is put a tab that says opportunistic infection or HIV-related illness, right? So that I knew if I went there, that's where I'm going to find that list. Because unfortunately, there's not enough room on the page where the code lives, like where B20 lives, or even where Z21 lives. There's not enough room for me to write in that full list. So I put it on a different page where I've got some room, but I put a tab there so I know, oh, that's what I'm looking for. That's where I can go find that information. That's really all a tab is there for, is to identify, here's where this information lives. HCPCS. I'm not going to read through all of these, don't worry. I would recommend tabbing each section. And depending on the publisher of your HCPCS manual, usually the color of the edges of the pages change each time the section changed to make it a little easier for you to identify. If you don't use your HCPCS manual a lot, maybe you don't want to tab all of the main sections, but you want to tab those that you use most frequently. For purposes of the exam, I would encourage you to tab each one of the sections. And I don't typically just tab them with the name. I focus more on the code range. And that applies for all of my code books. And you're going to see that in my pictures here in a few minutes. I use the code range because when I'm taking the certification exams, remember all of the AAPC exams, except for the CIC, are completely multiple choice. So they're giving me codes to pick from. It makes it easier for me to flip to that code and not have to think about, okay, well, this code starts with the letter J. That means it's a drug code. So here's where I need to go, right? Instead, my tabs say, oh, codes J000 through whatever are on this page. So I know where to start looking. Again, it's up to you. What other areas do I tab? Well, I tab my guidelines. I tab my anatomical illustrations, the alphabetic index. These other appendices, now this is based on the AAPC's HCPCS book. That's whose HCPCS book I happen to use. If you use a different publisher, their appendices may be in a different order. They may have different information in them than my book does. A couple of things I would encourage you if you are tabbing your HCPCS book to pay particular attention to. Know where the guidelines, where the information explaining kind of the history of HCPCS is, because that may be where some of your questions are for the certification exam. I would also encourage you to pay attention to modifiers, right? The HCPCS modifiers, the ambulance modifiers, the list of abbreviations, especially if you struggle with abbreviations and acronyms. Make sure that you know where that is. And if you have additional abbreviations or acronyms that you find you struggle with, I got one or two here or there that, man, I just really have a hard time remembering what they're for. If they're not already in that list, add them to the list, right? Pencil them in. Write them in your manual so that you've got those as kind of a safeguard for yourself. Let's see, payment status indicators, depending on which exam you're taking. If you're taking an exam for one of the facilities, right, COC or the CIC, those payment status indicators and the ambulatory surgery center, right, the ASC, payment status indicators, both of those are incredibly helpful. Your NCCI edits, yes, they're actually in your HCPCS book. Depending on your publisher. Pay attention to those. Those help you even in the day-to-day world. You've got that list without having to go to your encoder. And I know a lot of people think, oh, the HCPCS book, I never use it. It doesn't have anything in it that's helpful for me. Especially if you don't code for medications or you don't code for ambulance or you don't code for supplies. That couldn't be farther from the truth. There is a ton of useful information buried away in that HCPCS book, especially in the appendices. So it's one of my more frequently used books. So make sure that you're comfortable with it and that you know that that information is there and you know how to kind of dig down to it, find it, right? Mine it for gems. All right, the ICD-10 PCS book. Now, this is probably one of the most difficult for me because I want to tab everything. And sometimes it gets a little frustrating. I find it helpful because, again, it makes it easier for me to get there quickly. If you don't agree, you don't have to tab all of the different areas. But I tab all of the main coding tables. So just like we have the tabular in ICD-10-CM, we have tables in ICD-10-PCS. So I tab each one of those tables, right? They're all listed out there for you from the central nervous system all the way through the new technology tables. Then I also tab a lot of the appendices because that's where I find additional information. The official conventions, the guidelines, the anatomical illustrations, the alphabetic index, absolutely, because that's usually where we start. All of those appendices, root operation definitions, body part keys, device keys, aggregation tables, substance keys, all of those are helpful. So it really comes down to whose book are you using, right? Which publisher, not like, am I using my book or my friend's book? Because hopefully you're not doing anything to your friend's book without their permission. But which publisher are you using? Are you using AAPC? Are you using AMA? Are you using Optum, formerly Ingenix, right? Are you using PMIC? Are you using Elsevier? Whose book are you using? Because they all have the same content, but sometimes they have a little bit more content or a little different content depending on the publisher. They'll all have the main code part, right? The coding tables, the index, the guidelines, all of that's the same. But it's when you get to the appendices and the additional information that you may have different information depending on the publisher that you're using. So keep that in mind. Do your research. All right, moving on from what do I tab to how do I label the tabs? What do you recommend? What do I put? How do I label them? Now, some people choose to name them with the section. And you'll actually see this up here in this top picture. I'm not sure how well you can read it. That's actually one of my manuals from a couple of years ago when I was not as focused on, I was focused more on auditing services and I depended more on what specialty my provider was in. So I had a list of what each section was, just the title of the section, right? My evaluation and management, anesthesia, integumentary, musculoskeletal, so forth and so on. Now, some people want the code range in that section. When I say the code range, that gives you the code number. And remember that most of the time the exams are multiple choice. So you're going to want that code number for one of two reasons. For taking an exam, I want to be able to get there quickly, right? Because I want to be able to find that code number. If I'm coding in the real world day to day, I'm working in the index, it gives me a code number to go to, right? It doesn't say, oh, go to the musculoskeletal section. It says, oh, go to code 22002, right? It gives me some sort of code number. So that's what I actually find a lot of people want more frequently is the code range rather than the name. Now, some people put both if you're an overachiever, which I've been accused of being from time to time. But you'll notice that that's exactly what I did the last few years is I put both the code range. This is my ICD manuals down here. This was my CPT manual up here. But down here, for example, my ICD manuals, you'll notice it says C00 to D49. Oh, that's chapter 2, it's neoplasms. D50 to D89, that's chapter 3, it's blood and the immune mechanism. That way, regardless of how I was looking it up, whether I was going based on a code, whether I was going on the index, or I was just looking for something I knew was going to be in the nervous system or mental health codes or whatever it may be, I could look it up either way. It's really up to you and what works best for you. I've said that a lot. That's really what it comes down to. I can't tell you the best way to tab your books because your mind works a little differently than mine does. Everybody's does, right? Everybody's a little different. What I like, you might not like. Where do I tab? Now, this is funny because the individuals that work at CCO, we all have different perspectives on this. For example, if you talk to Lorene, Lorene's going to tell you she tabs across the bottom of her manual. If you talk to me, I'm going to tell you I tab the top and the side. I don't tab the bottom because I like my manuals to sit on the shelf right next to me. So I tend to tab the top and the side. And I put different things on the top than I put on the side. And these are pictures, some of these are pictures of my books, they're pictures of friends' books, they're pictures of students' books that have sent me what they've tabbed. Now, this one over here, you'll notice is the top of the manual. I do have a colleague that tabs the top of her manual for everything. That's where she puts it because she likes to be able to flip through, right? Let's say this is my coding manual, and it is. I don't have any tabs on it yet, but I want to be able to flip through the side very easily. So I may put my tabs across the top to flip to that section and still be able to flip on the side easily. Lorene will tell you she tends to do the same thing, but she tends to put her tabs at the bottom because usually her book is laying in front of her and she's working from the bottom rather than reaching up here to the top. It comes down to personal preference and how you use your books. The middle picture is a picture of my book. And I tended to tab the main sections down the side of the manual, but the supplementary sections, like the Category 2 and Category 3 codes for CPT, as well as the appendices across the top. Don't ask me why, that's just what I used to do. Now I do things a little differently. I tend to tab everything down the side, and my supplementary notes and other areas I want to go to for reference, I tend to put across the top. So your taste may change as you evolve, as you use the books more frequently, as you do different things. You'll notice the book over here, that's all they've done, is they're only tabbing extra stuff across the top, right? This one tabbed everything, this one tabs some stuff, and this one only tabs the extra little write-ins, the little notes, the little references they want to make sure that they can go back to later on. Side of the manual. These are all my manuals. This is kind of the style I've gotten into lately. I tend to tab the side of the manual with all of those main areas I recommended on the first few slides, right? And I tend to list both the title of that chapter as well as the code range. I tend to do it on the side just because that works easier for me. But across the top, I tend to tab my extras. Right? My note about opportunistic infections, my note about the Gastillo fracture classification table. In CPT, my note for figuring out spinal surgeries and whether they are counting interspaces or counting segments, right? I have all of that tabbed across the top so that I know it's not stuff that was originally in the book. It may be things that I supplemented, right? I added my day-to-day notes, the things that I use in coding every single day. So you could tab along the side. You could tab across the bottom of the manual. And this is actually somebody that didn't like the tabs to overlap, because if you'll notice on the ones I do on the side or even on the ones on the top, they tend to overlap, right? I can read these first two, but there's more tabs back behind there. Some people don't like that, right? So they started at the very bottom and they tabbed all the way around the manual, making sure that each section was readable by holding that book out so that they didn't have to try to look behind other tabs. Lorene tends to tab across the bottom, as I mentioned, because oftentimes she's sitting there working and she wants to be able to flip very quickly without having to look to the top of the book or the side of the book. She wants it right there, kind of in her eye view at the bottom of the book. Comes down to personal preference, what you like, what you don't. All right, so we've talked about what to tab and how to tab and where to tab and all of that kind of stuff. Let's talk a little bit. Oh, I almost forgot. You could tab everywhere, right? Multiple places. This is an old manual. You'll notice this is actually one of my old manuals from 2007. It used to have the little finger indents on CPT, but again, they got away from that because it's rather expensive to print the books that way. So instead, now I put my tabs here for all those main sections, but you'll notice across the top, that's where I was identifying some of the supplementary stuff. Appendix A, Category 2 and 3, the stuff that I don't use quite as frequently. Same thing over here. They tab down the side, they tabbed across the top. It just depends on what works for you. What kind of tabs? This is the next question that I get. And this is an area where I very much have changed my opinion and my thought over the years, because you can kind of tell some of my older manuals, this one way over here underneath, there's actually two manuals stacked up in this picture. But this back one was my CPT manual a couple of years ago. And I used to use those hard plastic tabs. And I don't know if you've seen this, they're tab size, but they have adhesive right here that you peel off and then they wrap around the edges of the page, right? And they're hard plastic. So they're pretty durable. They don't, break real easily. But what I found is I travel a lot, right? I travel to clients. I travel day to day, going to different places to teach or going to different places to audit, code, those sorts of things. And those tabs are not real forgiving. And I found that I was more frequent or more apt to rip a page or even to break the hard plastic on those because they don't really have a lot of give to them. So if my book didn't get sat down correctly or got snagged on something, those are permanent and they would tear my page, or the plastic on them, as you can tell on the edges of this one, have broken and the labels wouldn't want to stay in real well. And sometimes, right, those hard plastic ones were loose and the piece of paper that slid in there to label them would fall out. And I got frustrated with those. So I actually flipped for a while to using these up here, which are like Post-it tabs. And those worked for me for a while, and I hand wrote all of them. Yes, this is my handwriting on each one because they're the little ones, right? They're the little ones like this that just come off of here. I can't run these through my printer. Well, I probably could if I really wanted to put a lot of effort in, but I don't want to work that hard. So I would just hand write them, right? I would hand write on here, peel it off, put it where I wanted it. Then I found out about these printable labels, which is this middle section here. And those are the Avery's, the one I have listed here, the 16281s. Those Avery tabs, I found out I could order. They come on a sheet, and I can actually, let me grab a set. Hold on. See, I try to keep everything handy. They actually, those are labels. Those are not my printable ones. Sorry, give me just a second. Here we go. They actually come on a full sheet, right? So, and these are ones that I've printed and goofed up. But they come in a little package or a little package like this that has the plastic sealant, and it'll show you here's what you're getting. But you will get a full sheet of those tabs and you can run them through your printer. And there's a template for Word that you can set up and type in exactly what you want. And run them through and print what you want it to say on each one of those labels. So there's lots of different options for tabs. Now, if you're interested and you're trying to figure out, well, which ones am I going to do? How do I find the Post-it flags? How do I find the printables? How do I find the hard plastic tabs? Personal experience. How did I find each of these? Well, the hard plastic tabs, back in the day when I used to get them, they all came from Walmart, believe it or not, because that's where I shopped at the time. That's where I could find them. And that's really the only option I had in the little town that I grew up in was Walmart. So I would go to Walmart and I would get those hard plastic tabs. Well, then I switched to the Post-it flags. Post-it flags you can get almost anywhere. You can get them at Walmart, you can get them at Target, you can get them at any office supply store. Heck, you can even get them at CVS or the drugstores a lot of times, right? These little plastic ones. The Avery printable ones, where have I had success finding those? I have not had success finding them in my office supply stores locally. Most of my Staples and Office Max and Office Depot and those sorts of things don't carry them locally, but they carry them on their website. For best pricing, I've actually found them on Amazon. For those of you who know me or have heard me talk before, yes, I'm an Amazon addict. I am one of their Prime members, so I get free 2-day shipping, all that good stuff. But that's where I get a lot of the stuff. So actually, I found all three of these on Amazon. I'm going to flip over to Amazon's website for a minute and kind of show you what I searched and how I found things. To find the Post-it tabs, right? These little, actually, let's see. Are those these? Here are the hard plastic tabs that I started with, right? They're made by Avery. They have you can print the insert that goes in there, or you can handwrite them. But these are the little self-adhesive tabs I talked about that kind of wrap around the page. Oh, here, I actually have Another old manual I was referencing the other day. For those that ask, what do you do with your old manuals? Well, if you're anything like me, you keep them. Put them on a bookshelf. Because you never know when you're going to use them. Not only for audits, but sometimes people ask you a question and the only place you can find the answers is in some of the old manuals. But if you can tell, and I don't know if you can, let me flip this around here, right? These just stick right to the page, and they stick on either side of the page, right? So they just split open and hook on, and then they're permanent. You will not get them off without tearing the page. So if you're going to use those, make sure you get them in the right spot. But that's the self-adhesive hard plastic tabs. In this case, the Avery number is 16239. You can get them in multicolor, which is the 16239, or you can get them in all clear. If you're one of those people that doesn't like the multicolor, you want them all clear, you don't want any color distractions, that's okay. The Post-it tabs, I just did a search on Post-it tabs. There's lots of different ones that you could use. They've got some that are, you know, all color from here to there. Those kind of bothered me. I want color, but I tend to like just a little bit of color on the end, and then I can write in what I want. This is an example of one package that has two different sizes in it. There's different colors you can get as well. They've got kind of a neon color as opposed to the red, green, and blue. Again, it's all up to personal preference. What do you like? What do you not like? Some people have used Post-its, actual Post-it notes in the past as their tabs. Can you do that? Yes, but be aware that for AAPC certification exams, if you're using a Post-it note as a flag, so something like this, a true Post-it note, if you're using that as your tab, it cannot have anything written on it other than what's in that section, right? It can say musculoskeletal code this to this. It cannot have any additional information about what the musculoskeletal section is supposed to cover. No additional notes written on it. If it has any additional notes written on it, the proctors will remove it from your manual. So you're better off just to use a little, right? A little flag, a little something, just enough to give you the information that you need. And not, the other problem with Post-it notes, they tend to block a big part of the code if you're using that. Because you don't want this whole section that's not sticky hanging off the page, because that gets a little messy when you're trying to work with the book. So just another option. And then if you're looking for the printable Avery labels, these are the 16281s. These are the ones that I use. They come in a 96 pack, so I get 96 labels for less than $5. I think that's a pretty good deal for me. I can tab all of my manuals for the year with that one package of tabs, which makes me a happy girl. I take that back. By the time I do PCS, I think I had to have 2 sets to do all of my books for all the manuals tabs that I want, but it really depends on which manuals you're tabbing and how many tabs you want and what you want to label and all that kind of stuff. You can also get these in just white, right? They offer those right down here, just below. I think they're like 10 cents more. But if you don't like the color, this has 5 color options in it. This one has all white as your option. So again, it's totally up to you what you prefer, what your preference is. So let's go back over to our slides for the moment. Let's see. So we've talked about what to tab and where to tab and how to tab and what kind of tabs. Let's see if there's anything else. I think we're ready to wrap up. Hopefully I've answered as many of your questions about how to tab your manuals and where to tab your manuals and what to tab in your manuals as I possibly can. Really, it all comes down to personal preference. Tab what makes it easier for you. But keep in mind, it's whatever may sound good in your head sometimes doesn't work real well in actual implementation. For example, when I say a lot of people like to tab down the side and they like to tab every letter in the index, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way through. That doesn't work well for me because I find myself tripping over those tabs, right? I'd rather just be able to flip through and find what I'm looking for. But it may work better for you. Some people say, oh, I do that, but I tab across the top so I can flip across the side. Comes down to your personal preference. And I would encourage you, if you're going to do the alphabet, do those little ones. Use the smaller Post-it flags. I think I have some here. Look and see. Yep. I would encourage you to use something like this, the smaller ones, because they take up less space. They make it a little easier for you. Instead of writing A, and that's all that's on these great big ones, you can write an A on these little ones. It works just as well. But again, it's your personal preference, whatever works the best for you. You can also oftentimes buy pre-printed labels that go A to Z, because we use them a lot in medical records rooms back in the old days, right? Before electronic medical records, and even in the hard copy storage that many of the facilities still do. So keep that in mind. The point of the tabs is to make your life easier. If it's making it more difficult for you, don't do as many. And remember, you can always remove them, with the exception of those hard plastic tabs. The only way you can get those off is to cut the edge off. And yes, I've done that in a few places where I just got tired of them. They weren't working right, and I cut it off the edge of my book. So you can always remove them. You can always add to them. It's whatever makes it easier for you. Where you tab it, it's up to you. What kind of tabs you use, it's whatever you like. So keep that in mind, and don't be worried if somebody else tabbed their book a little differently than you did. Maybe talk to them, ask them, hey, what works for you? What do you have different things tabbed than I do? Because maybe they have a reason for tabbing those other things that might help you, or maybe you do something one way that might help them. We don't all have to be the same, right? That's one of the great things about this is the way that we do it, we can do it the way that works for us, even if it doesn't work for somebody else. So remember that your tabbed manuals will help speed you up. And when we talk about the certification exams, the biggest area that people struggle with and the biggest area they have trouble with is time management. And these tabs are there to help you flip more quickly through the manual and cut down the amount of time and the struggle that you have searching for the code options to figure out what the differences between those codes are. So keep that in mind. Hopefully this has been helpful to you, and I've answered many of your questions. As always, if you have additional questions, don't hesitate to send them in. If you have other topics that you want to see covered, absolutely go out and let us know, right? Go out and use our topic request form. I'll cover that real quick here. If you go out to our website, cco.us, okay, and up here at the top, under Contact CCO, the fourth item down is the topic request. You can come in here and put in the questions that you have and what venue you would like them answered in. It doesn't have to be this Did You Know with me. I do like Did You Knows, right? And the purpose of the Did You Knows is all about helping students that are starting out or helping out coders who are new to certain niches in the industry. So that's why you see me do a lot on how to prepare for this or how to prepare for that, where to find information on this, how to use this website or how to use this tool. That's really what it's all about. If you've got exam questions and work environment questions and how to get a job and resume questions, I definitely encourage that on the Live with Lorene's. We do those on Tuesday mornings. The Q&A webinar, right? We have one this Thursday. We have these once a month, and they are completely free to anybody, right? It's simply, they're free, but if you want the CEUs, those cost $5. The CEU is $5, but the webinar itself you can attend at no cost. And then if you're a student of ours, we've got all of our student support calls, Find a Code user groups, CPT webinar updates, ICD updates, Podio users groups. So if you're not sure where your topic falls, that's okay. You can put, I don't know, right? You can put this right down here. You can say, I don't know, I'm unsure. Or if you have an area where you would like it presented, hey, I really want it covered on Live with Lorene, or I really want it covered on the Q&A webinar, that's fine. You can select that. And they'll come to me for review. All you have to do here, put in your name, give me your email address, so that if I have questions on your question or on your topic request, I know how to reach you. I say I because I usually am the one out here vetting these and deciding where we're going to present them and how soon we're going to get them up and all of that. If you're a club member, let us know that you're a club member so that we can get them answered and in the club as quickly as possible. Subject is what are you asking about, and the question in detail is what is it that you need, right? You could put in the subject, oh, coding books. And my question is all about, what kind of notes do you recommend? Where do we put the tabs? All of those questions that we've been answering, right? Or it could be something like resume writing. Well, where do I go for good resume templates? What are some of the buzzwords that I could use? All of those different things. You can ask us coding questions. You can ask us questions, again, about resources you can use. Any question that you need, we're going to try and answer. Okay, as long as it's coding, billing, compliance, practice management, somehow related to the business side of medicine, right? So hopefully this entire webinar today has been helpful for you. And hopefully we'll see you back on a future episode of Did You Know? We'll have another one next week, same time, same place. See you then. And until then, happy coding.